Hey, what's going on, YouTube? It is the Dual Threat Podcast here, your daily news source for all things sports. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Helps us out a lot. We are going to react and do our own top 10. We're going to react to the college football committee's top 10, they released their top 25, but we're just doing the top 10 for this week. I kind of have some differing opinions that we'll get into later, but first, Jacob, take it away. Who do you got at number 10?
At number 10, this is going to be, I think, one of the only positions in the top 10 that I actually think I agree with the committee on. I'm going to go with Miami. You look at the teams around them. Georgia, I personally don't think should be in the top 10. Oklahoma, Cincinnati, Iowa State. It feels like Miami 10 is a good spot for them. They're 8-1, beat some bad teams close, some okay teams close, like NC State, who's not been great but not been bad. But at the end of the day, they're 8-1. Their most recent game was a 48-0 win over Duke. It means something. They play UNC this weekend, so I guess we'll see if they really are a top 10 team. But as for now, I think I have no problem putting them at number 10, and just based on like who's around them, I think that's a good spot for the playoff committee to put them. What about you?
See, I can't put Miami in the top 10. They have a good record, but my thing is they're barely squeezing by these pretty average teams. I mean, they beat Virginia 19-14, Virginia Tech 25-24. They did come out and beat Duke pretty handily, but Duke is not a good team. They just beat NC State 44-41 the week before that. They got hammered by Clemson, but Clemson's a really good team, and Miami's not that tier 1 yet. But I can't put Miami in the top 10 just for those reasons. And for my number 10, I'm actually going to put I was debating on putting either Georgia or Oklahoma. I think if they played this weekend, I think I got Oklahoma in that game, so I'm going to put Oklahoma at 10. They've been on fire recently. Ever since that Texas game, it seems like they really woke up and went on a streak. I believe they're on like a 6-game streak now, maybe 5-game streak. They got West Virginia this weekend, a West Virginia team that just got blown out by Iowa State, and so I don't see that they're going to have an issue with that. They beat Oklahoma State pretty handedly, and Oklahoma State not too long ago was a top 5 team. I didn't really fall for it. I don't think we really did, but I think Oklahoma has been on fire recently, and I'm going to put them in the top 10 just because I think if they played Georgia or if they played Miami this weekend, I think they beat them. So I got them at 10. And at 9, I have Iowa State. I have Iowa State over Oklahoma just because of that head-to-head win. Plus, they just blown out a pretty good West Virginia defense. And so I'm going to reward them. I'm not going to reward them as much as college football playoffs have them. At number 7 is what they have them. I have them at number 9. I feel like that's a pretty good spot for them. I would say they're probably one of the best 2-loss teams in the country. And, earlier in the season, it was really hard. It was really hard to see where they were because of that loss to Louisiana, Lafayette, pretty early in the year. Now it seems like they've gotten their feet underneath them and are competing for the first conference championship that they could have in 100 years. So I've got them at number 9. Who do you have, Jacob?
I'm with you in the putting 2 Big 12 teams near the end of the rankings, which makes me a little interested as to who you're putting at 8 if you already have OU and Iowa State, maybe Coastal. Number 9, I have Oklahoma. For all the same reasons you said. I think they've been improving dramatically since the beginning of the season. Spencer Rattler's really finding home in that offense, and they look good. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Again, just like you said, Iowa State, I have at 8. They have the head-to-head. They've also looked very good since the early parts of the season, and they're going to play in the Big 12 championship, so one of them is probably going to move up a few spots by the end of the season. One of them is going to move down a few spots. But as of right now, I think they're really close, and I think it was a little disrespectful of the college football playoff committee to put Iowa State above Cincinnati, even though they just beat Texas and just blew out um, whoever just played West Virginia. I still don't think they should put them above Cincinnati. And yeah, Cincinnati hasn't played in 6 weeks, it feels like, but I would put Oklahoma at 9, Iowa State at 10. I mean, Iowa State at 8. So I'm interested. Who do you have at 8, Drew?
I actually have Cincinnati at 8. I dropped them 1 as well this week. They haven't played in a while, and I don't want to punish them, but I think the team I've got above them is better. I mean, it's hard to talk about Cincinnati for a while just because they haven't played. And their most recent win, or their game this week as well, got postponed, which was probably going to be their or I guess it just got canceled. And so it's kind of hard to put Cincinnati up there when their best game of the season, which would have been against Tulsa, a ranked Tulsa team, got canceled. I realize they'll play in the AAC championship, but I just don't know what to do with them because they haven't played in so long. The last time we saw them, they didn't look very good against a UCF team that's pretty average this year for an AAC team. And so I dropped them to number 8. Haven't seen them since then. Don't really know what they're going to do. At number 7, I actually have Coastal Carolina. To me, they have a better resume than Cincinnati. They have a Power 5 win. I realize that's Kansas. It's not very important. But they have a win over a Louisiana team that is 9-1, currently ranked at number 19. And if you remember, like I said earlier, Louisiana beat Iowa State first week of the year. So Coastal also has that win against BYU. Coastal is one of the few teams in the top 10, at least in my top 10, that have wins over 2 ranked teams. So, I mean, it's pretty mind-boggling to me that they have them at 13, but Cincinnati at 8. I don't see how they can do that just because I feel like Coastal Carolina has a better resume at this point. They're both undefeated. Coastal Carolina has played more games. Coastal Carolina has played a Power 5 team. Coastal Carolina has 2 ranked wins compared to Cincinnati 0. So that's just me. I've got Coastal Carolina at 7. That's probably a pretty unpopular opinion, but I don't know. The Sean's pretty impressed me a lot. I really didn't think they were going to be in that game with BYU, as I said last week, and I was shocked. And now they're in my top 10, replacing where BYU was. So who do you got at number 7?
Number 7 is where I have Cincinnati. Last week we had BYU here. I think we both did. At least I did. I know. Watching that game, it makes me feel like the playoff committee, to me, looks like Vegas because it just felt like they had some sort of inside knowledge nobody else knew. Maybe they just know football better than us, but it looked like Coastal Carolina and BYU were perfectly matched, and neither of them looked like top 10 teams in that game. And going into that game, you and I both thought BYU was the better team pretty clearly. I thought they were going to win that game by a decent amount, and Coastal came out and beat them, but it was close. And it wasn't, to me, the type of close as when Bama and Clemson play. It was the type of close as when maybe Miami and North Carolina are going to play next week. And so I think Coastal, in my opinion, is right outside the top 10, but I can't put them up there. I think we overrate BYU a tiny bit. And so I'm going to put Cincinnati here at 7. I think their record speaks for themselves. And being 8-0 this late in the season, there's not much else you can do other than put them in the middle to later top 10 range. Number 6, last weekend, I put this team at number 4 just because of a little bit of recency bias with A&M and how things have shaped up. I thought A&M worse just because of how they played against LSU, but I have Florida at number 6. I test how they actually perform, how I personally think they would perform. I think they're better than Ohio State. Resume-wise, record-wise, I have to put them at 6. again, last week I put them above A&M. I put them above Ohio State because Ohio State hadn't played A&M and looked bad against LSU. Things changed this week. I got to put Florida at 6, even though I think they're a phenomenal team with maybe the best offense in the country. Their season's coming down to the SEC championship this coming week or next week. So we'll see how that shapes out. Right now, I got them at 6, just like the committee does. What about you?
I don't know if y'all remember this, but I actually had a rant of the week, and I feel like I'm going to have to go on one right here. I have Ohio State at number 6. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that A&M and Florida are not at 4 and 5 right now. They have played twice as many games as Ohio State. Ohio State's strength of schedule is 72nd in the nation, and they're playing half the amount of games that these other teams are. I think it's ridiculous that they're number 4 right now. I think had their name on the front of their jersey been different, I think there's no way they're in the top 10, at least with their resume as it stands. Even if you look at their strength of record, it's 6th right now, and A&M is 3rd, Notre Dame is 2nd, Alabama's 1st. Florida is tied with them in strength of record. I just don't see how you can put them at 4, besides the fact that it's going to make your committee a lot of money if they make the playoffs. I mean, they have 5 games. They're most likely, as of right now at 9:16 p.m. on a Tuesday night, Ohio State is not eligible to make their conference championship. I can pretty much guarantee you that's going to change tomorrow, just so they can, help Ohio State make the playoffs. Because to be fair, it is Big Ten's fault. It's not Ohio State's fault that they're not able to play all these games. But I think it's just ridiculous that they're just going to change all of their rules to help Ohio State go to the championship. You look at Indiana, they're 7-1 right now. They followed all the rules. They played enough games. You're going to tell them they can't go to the Big Ten championship just because your baby over here doesn't have enough wins? I think it's ridiculous. I think the same people, the same committee that put Oregon at 13 when they're 3-0 because they realize they're only going to play 6 games this year and that's not going to be enough to go to the playoffs. I think it's ridiculous they put Ohio State at number 4 this week, knowing that they're most likely only going to play 5 or 6 games this year before the playoffs. I think it's ridiculous. 72nd in strength of schedule. That is last in the top 6. You got Alabama at 30th at the strength schedule. Notre Dame 42nd, Clemson 39th, Texas A&M 6th in strength of schedule, Florida 33rd, and you're telling me you have these 2 teams behind a 72nd strength of schedule? I think that's absurd. I understand that Texas A&M got blown out by Alabama by 28 points. Really, you could argue that would be 21 points. They put in their backup, but whatever. It was a blowout. But I think you got to look at Texas A&M. They looked weak coming out at the beginning of this year, and they have improved tremendously. I think this would be a closer game than people realize, especially now that Waddle is injured. And now that Texas A&M found their identity with their run game and their offensive line, the Maroon Goons, as we hate them calling it, I think that would be a closer game. I would love to see a rematch with them or Florida if that could somehow happen. I doubt it. But I think it's ridiculous that they have Ohio State at 6, and I'm going to keep saying that, and I will continue to think that because they have played half the games as everybody else. You look at Notre Dame, they literally have twice as better of a record than them. It's ridiculous. And you're going to tell me that a team that plays half the amount of time is going to still make the playoffs. They, by far, have the easiest route of the playoffs I have ever seen. And so those are my thoughts on Ohio State. I'm in no way an Ohio State hater. I actually predicted them to beat LSU last year had they made the playoffs. I think had they made the championship. I think they matched up a little bit better against LSU last year. But I don't know. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's really unfair to the teams below them. But yeah, that's my rant of the week. So I have them at number 6. I have Florida at number 5. Florida fans have been saying to put them above Texas A&M. My problem is you keep pointing to Texas A&M. Hey, look, they're only beating LSU by 13. They only beat Auburn by 11. You beat Tennessee by 12 or whatever. Like, you're not blowing these teams out while Texas A&M is having a close game. So I'm not going to put you above them, especially because they have the head-to-head. I realize it was at A&M. It was a 3-point game, but they still beat you. It's just how life goes. Luckily for you, you control your destiny. You just got to beat Alabama in the SEC championship. And so I got them at number 5. What about you?
Yeah, so I, like you, I cannot put Ohio State top 4. The only reason I really have them above Florida is because, like you said, I think they're going to change the rule and let them play in the Big Ten championship, and I don't think Florida's going to Bama. And so, personally, I think Ohio State, not based on necessarily record right now, but really how I think the rest of the season is going to shape up, should be number 5. I completely agree with everything you said about Ohio State. This is not the same team as last year. They don't have Chase Young. They don't have Jeff Okuda. They don't have J.K. Dobbins. Three guys, 2 guys that went top 5 in the draft. 1 guy that went, I think, was the second running back taken, 3rd. It's ridiculous to think that right now you can say that they are a better team than A&M, like the committee has. If this were power rankings, I could see an argument that they maybe are more talented than A&M. But like you said, A&M just put up 300-plus rushing against a good Auburn defense. They're not as good as they typically are, but they've still been good, especially against the run season. I'm dumbfounded by the fact that they put Ohio State number 4. And the way that Kirk Herbstreit and the rest of the ESPN guys were talking about it after they came out with number 4, they made it seem like there was no chance that unless Ohio State ends now, and even then, they made it sound like there was no shot that they think A&M gets into the playoff, which I cannot understand for the life of me. A team that is 7-1 with 1 or 2 remaining games that should be easy wins. I mean, you look at even this week, okay, scoreboard, they didn't blow up Auburn. But look at the stat sheet, and they outplayed Auburn in every aspect of the game. Bo Nix had that one remarkable, unbelievably, I would argue, lucky touchdown to keep them in the game and effectively put them up right after they scored after that. But you look at Kellen Mond, 18 for 23. That is miles better than his bad game against LSU, which was 11 for 33. Almost 200 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. But when you look at the run game, which is where they've been elite, they have, in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of people, the best O-line in the country, and 47 rushing attempts for the team and 313 rushing yards, which I don't care how good your defense is, and Ohio State's defensive line is not anything special. You're not stopping 313 rushing yards worth of offense. I think you hit it right on the head when you said if they had a different name on the front of their jersey, it would be different. If this were Wisconsin, if this were Northwestern, if this were Indiana even, there is no chance that they're number 4 right now. They're probably number 7 with how this is going. And I guarantee you the Big Ten is not changing a rule for them if it's anybody other than Ohio State or maybe Michigan if they were in the same position. But I completely agree with you. And like I said, the only reason I have Ohio State above Florida, if this, like I said, were power rankings and I was ranking who I think is the best team, I would put Florida at number 5 over Ohio State. But I think they're going to change the rule. I don't think Florida's beating Alabama in the SEC championship. So I have Florida 6, Ohio State 5. I don't know what else to say. I don't see how you can put Ohio State over A&M.
Yeah, I don't really get it either. You look at resume, you look at better wins. I mean, I understand that A&M has that one loss, but they've played twice as many games. That's twice as many opportunities to lose. And we all remember Ohio State versus Purdue a few years ago. Ohio State is not an unbeatable team this year at all. I understand the Big Ten is not very good. That's another argument, though. You look at the 10 teams in the Big Ten, I think 6 of them only have 2 wins this far in the season. It's so ridiculous. If this were any other team, this would not be the way it is right now. And I feel bad for those Texas A&M fans. I feel bad for Cincinnati fans. and Coastal Carolina fans, I guess, with the way that I put them above Cincinnati. But I don't get how Ohio State can play half as many games and still get the benefit of the doubt over these other teams. It just makes no sense to me. I think it's obviously biased towards to get more views for the college football playoffs. And I think you were saying that they were talking like Texas A&M has no shot in the playoffs. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. They're already writing off the fact that Clemson's going to beat Notre Dame and that Ohio State's going to get in, and that's just it. And then Alabama wins. That's all. That's all that's going to happen. No other scenarios are possible, and I just think that's absurd. And I will say this, though. I think if Notre Dame does beat Clemson in the ACC championship, I think they might actually get A&M and jump Ohio State and put them at number 3 just so Notre Dame and A&M could play. And I would love that matchup. I think that would probably be A&M's best matchup in the playoffs. I think they're two very similar teams. Their offense is pretty inconsistent. Their quarterback is not elite, but they play traditional football and they get the job done against pretty good teams. So I would love to see that matchup. They both have great defenses, pretty good offenses. I would love to see that matchup for sure. I think that's Texas A&M's best chance of getting in. Notre Dame's got to win. Ohio State, I guess they're just getting in no matter what, because the graph they put on this tonight was they had a 74% chance of getting in, even if they don't play the Big Ten championship. And I'm sure they're going to change the rules for that to happen. But it's obvious the committee is looking for any little thing to put Ohio State in this year. And I think that's ridiculous and unfair to the other teams. And so I got Texas A&M at number 4. I would love for Texas A&M and Ohio State to match up this weekend. Both games got canceled. Don't see that happening. I don't think Ohio State would do it. They really don't have anything to gain just because of how much bias they have from the committee. And if Ohio State, if Big Ten's not going to change their rule for the 6 wins, why would Ohio State want to actually get a good team as their 6th win? And if they don't change that rule and they change it to the where Ohio State can schedule anybody, there's no chance they're going to schedule the 5th team in the country. Why would they do that? That doesn't help them. They're going to schedule some cupcake to just beat on to get that 6th win so then they can go to the Big Ten championship and just go along their way. So I don't see that game happening. I would love for that to happen. I don't see it. I'm sorry, A&M fans. We're with y'all. We'd love to see that, but it's just not going to happen. And so, yeah, I've got Texas A&M at 4, and I've got Clemson at number 3, 9-1 with their loss to Notre Dame. Came out looking strong against, I think it was Virginia Tech. They beat them 45-10. And, I mean, we kind of expected that to happen. We had that as one of our lines. And Trevor Lawrence has looked as good as he has in the past. And I can see that continuing coming up to this game against Notre Dame, but I think it's going to be a pretty good matchup. And so, yeah, I got Clemson at number 3. What about you, Jacob?
So I never really went in depth about my number 4. A&M, you hit it on the head. I kind of said something about it earlier with the offensive line. Their run game it's incredible. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It reminds me a lot of the Cleveland Browns right now. They're 9-3. Some of y'all may not watch the NFL, but they are averaging like over 200 rush yards per game. A&M they got blown out, which, granted, it's Alabama. Their one loss was against Alabama. They had 115 rushing yards. 43 was by the backup quarterback on the one drive he played. So you take those rushing yards out, they have like 70 rushing yards. Every other game this entire season, they've had 150 plus rushing yards, going over 200, I think 3 times, and over 300 this most recent week against Auburn. They are a different team than what they were able to be against Alabama. You look at the Alabama game, it was 14-14 pretty early on in the second quarter. And then a couple of key plays, Alabama being Alabama. And if you can't keep up, you can't keep up. And they couldn't in that game. And the problem was, right when they fell behind, it eliminated the run game essentially, because they can't lean on the run when they're behind and they need to pass and they need to score to catch up. That is why I think it would be completely different game were they to play again, because A&M would get out early and their focus would be take a lot of time, score, but have these long 6, 7, 8 minute drives that end in touchdowns. I think they're number 4. They have improved dramatically on defense from where they were against Bama, and their run game has stepped up. Again, they had like around 70 yards against Bama, other than their backup quarterback running, and over 150 every other game. You can't. We already raged about Ohio State enough. It's, again, a lot of it's not their fault, but I think A&M deserves to be number 4 a significant amount more than Ohio State. And you can argue that Ohio State might be a better team. And you look at what they've done the past few years, you have that argument. But you can't tell me that resume-wise and how they've looked this season alone, A&M should not be ahead of them. So recency bias from the playoff last year, maybe. Just Ohio State bias in general, maybe. But I personally would put A&M above them. And then also Clemson number 3, for all the reasons you state. Trevor Lawrence is a beast. Every game he's been in, even the games he missed, they looked good. They've looked insanely a lot better with him when he's been back. They've given up 27 points on defense, which is something we talked about around the Notre Dame game, is that he's keeping the defense off the field, which, even though DJ was putting up good numbers, the energy that Trevor Lawrence brings when you have your best player, one of the best players in the country, and you let him be the leader of your team, it works. It does a lot for your defense that they were clearly missing, because the games Trevor Lawrence missed against Boston College was 34-28, really close game that shouldn't have been. And the Notre Dame game, obviously, their defense, those are the 2 worst games of the season for them on defense. And I think it just shows how much on both sides of the ball Trevor Lawrence does for that team. And they're definitely a scary team moving forward for the rest of college football.
Yeah, and I don't want to keep jumping back to this, but I just want to go ahead and bring a few things up. I don't want to dig on Ohio State. They are 5-0. Their win last week was really impressive against Michigan State. You could argue Michigan State's not a very good team, but 28 of Ohio State's players were out, including their coach as well, and they still went out and beat a Michigan State team, and pretty handily. And that was pretty impressive. And you could argue that that's top 4 material, but like he touched on, resume-wise, that's not enough to put him in the top 4. And something else I wanted to touch up on, you may notice that we kind of talk about A&M a lot, but that's just because we feel as though they're a forgotten team in college football right now. I watch all of these college football ranking shows, and I think A&M gets brought up maybe once or twice, and then they just brush them off. And I don't think people like to remember that A&M has the second best win in college football right now. I mean, Alabama over A&M is probably the most impressive just because of how bad it was. You could argue that Notre Dame's was better against Clemson, but I would say there's kind of an asterisk on that, not because of the quarterback scenario really, but because of the defensive players that were out on Clemson. So that's kind of why we talk about Texas A&M a lot. They are number 5 right now, and people act like they're number 20 and there's no possible chance and they shouldn't even be talked about. I think it's ridiculous. And we think that they deserve a little bit more spotlight, so we try to give it to y'all. But yeah, so there you go. That's why we talk about Texas A&M a lot. Don't want to dig on Ohio State. Their resume is just not that impressive. Moving on, I got Notre Dame at 2. I'm not going to lie to y'all. That game against Syracuse was a little scary there for a minute. They ended up winning by 24, I think it was. 45-21, yeah, 24. And they were making a little mistakes. They were getting stopped. They were getting 3 and outs against a 1-9, 1-10 now Syracuse team, and that's not going to cut it against Clemson. You're really going to need to have that spark from the last time y'all played. And I mean, you can't play the way that you played against Syracuse against Clemson. because I promise you it will not end up the same way that it did last time, especially with Trevor Lawrence and those defensive players back. So, yeah, I got Notre Dame at number 2. 10-0, haven't lost a conference championship yet in their entire time of playing football, but there you go. Who do you have at number 2, Jacob?
Yeah, I obviously also have Notre Dame at number 2. I'm not putting Bama at number 2. Really quick, it's just going back to something you said, talking about A&M getting just forgotten. I think there is no doubt in my mind, 100% fact, that if this were Georgia in A&M scenario, Georgia's number 4 and Ohio State's 5, because one of those top dogs in the SEC will always have that bias that everybody talks about, but for whatever reason, A&M doesn't. And it's probably because they got beat so bad by Bama, but it just feels like these guys don't watch college football, because maybe they watch the big teams, but like when you watch A&M, again, they won by 11 points against Auburn, a very solid Auburn team, but they just dominated on offense and just couldn't capitalize a couple times in the end zone. But enough talking about them. Notre Dame, like you said, great team, 10-0, big win over Clemson. I was talking to a Notre Dame fan that I know, and he was talking about how the UNC win was a huge win. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think UNC is a fine team. I don't think they're any better than Auburn, as we were just discussing with A&M. I think it's a good win. For whatever reason, they got moved up 3 spots after losing. So I guess take that with a grain of salt. I guess that's how they think that it was that close of a game with Notre Dame that they moved them up. But in all reality, the problem with this Notre Dame team is they're not winning big enough against these bad teams. I mean, you look at who did we talk about earlier? Was it Cincinnati? No. Who was it that beat Duke 40-0? 48-0, Miami beat Duke.
Mm-hmm.
You know what Notre Dame beat Duke? 27-13. Granted, first game of the season, you got to give a little bit of slack for that. But even then, they come back from being on COVID, win against Florida State, and then win by 5 against Louisville. The problem with Notre Dame, and like I've been saying all night, you put them there because that's what their resume, that's what they've accomplished this season, what they deserve. But in terms of the good teams, what they do, Clemson comes out, beats Miami by 25. They beat good teams big, and Notre Dame hasn't done that this season. And you look at Bama, they're beating Auburn by 28 or whatever it was. And it goes to show that Notre Dame is a good team. They're not one of those elite teams. And I think if their defense stumbles like they did against Clemson the first time they played, giving up 40 points, it's not going to be a fun time for them in the playoffs. But you got to put them at 2 because whether it's pretty or not, they have gotten those wins. And there is something to say about how Ian Book has been playing pretty much ever since the Clemson game. He's been looking great and taking nothing away from that defense and that run game. It's been phenomenal. I would just like to see, and I know they don't have another game before the ACC championship, which is hard to judge, so we'll see it then. I would have liked to see a 50-7 win. I would have liked to see a 45-10 win, something that they just proved they were like, okay, we are that much better than everybody else. We should be a top team. And their win over Clemson said all that. No hate for Notre Dame. It's just going to be interesting to see what happens against another elite team. And I'm excited to watch that game against Clemson next weekend. Number 1, who else? Alabama is just, they're so much further ahead than everybody else, beating LSU 55-17. Devontae Smith had 3 touchdowns. Najee Harris had 3 touchdowns. That last Devontae Smith touchdown was cold. There's really nothing to say about Bama. They have a top 2 Heisman contender for this season. They have two other people that could be Heisman contenders, in my opinion. If you look at the top 6, I would argue that Mac Jones, Devontae Smith, and Najee Harris should all be in that conversation or close to it. And I don't think there's anybody that can stop Bama, anybody that can keep up with Bama. Not this season. Maybe another season, but not with how Clemson's looked. Even though they've looked good in their one big game, they didn't look good. We'll see. Hopefully everybody's healthy for that game, because I would love to see, however it turns out, Bama play solid, really good teams in the playoff, because they should be fun to watch. But at the same time, you look at, who knows? They could come out and win both playoff games by 21 plus and just cruise to a national championship like LSU did, and I really think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think if their defense steps up, I think that's what we're going to see, and they have been stepping up recently. Held Kentucky or Mississippi State to 0, Kentucky to 3, Auburn to 13, LSU to 17. Granted, those aren't the best offensive teams, but it's still pretty impressive when you shut out a team or hold them to only a field goal. So got to give them credit. Alabama, number 1 for me as well. It's pretty hard to find anybody on this planet that's going to say that they're not the number 1 team right now. And I don't see them losing a game. I think probably if they come out and beat Florida by 40, I don't see them losing a game. I think their best matchup as of this current moment is either Clemson or Florida. And just because of that offense that they have, all 3 of those teams really have elite offenses, and those are their 3 best matchups. So if they come out and beat Florida, a team that we think have an elite offense, by 30 points, then I don't see them losing a game this year. And so, yeah, got them at number 1, have had them for number 1, and they'll probably continue to stay at number 1. They've got Arkansas this weekend. Expect that to be another blowout. And so, yeah. That's going to wrap up our rankings video for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Comment any differing opinions as well. Do you think Ohio State should be in the top 4 right now? Obviously, we disagree. But if you do, please tell us why. Maybe we're just missing something. Make sure to hit that like button as well. Follow us on Twitter. We just like to, say some stuff on there, get some stuff off our chest sometimes, as well as putting on lines and updating us. Updating you on those as well. And thank you all for tuning in, and have a great day.